The Victorian era had some pretty unique innovating moments, from the development of X-rays to the emergence of inventions like the telephone and the light bulb. But even with the Industrial Revolution, there were also a lot of weird inventions like the artificial leech. With great medical care, you can guarantee your doctor will give you the best leeches to help get rid of that bad causing you to get sick, but because leeches were hard to come by and it was an actual occupation for someone to get leeches to sell to doctors, the profession in itself was actually getting pretty expensive as well. And so the artificial leech was created. During the Victorian period, scientific and medical research boomed as doctors experimented with all kinds of cures and treatments, as according to researchers of this era, using leeches for bloodletting also proved so popular it led to the shortage of the worms. And so this artificial leech was used to stimulate and simulate the similar effects of extracting said bad blood out. Which, to be honest, may work for some treatments. After all, bloodletting is still used today in the treatments of a few diseases including hemochromatosis and polycythemia. It's even practiced by specifically trained practitioners in the hospitals using techniques also known as therapeutic phlebotomy. I mean, if you were sick, would you use the real leech or an AI one? But that was the thing with professionals of their craft, is that they always wanted to make something more simple, like Eugene, Frederic, Kastner, who wanted to do something that every person would enjoy. Like when you go to church, it would be so exciting if you saw an exploding organ. Yes, George wanted the organ to be so dramatic, he made and designed an organ which blew out fire out of its windpipes instead of just normal wind. I swear in The Simpsons they had an episode where some guy was playing this exact organ, or was it Family Guy? I don't know. But you know what would be funny? If by some comedic effect, imagine they were going to show this invention off, but they didn't tell anyone the pipes were going to blast fire, so they thought, you know, it'd be the best place to show off our cool new invention during a funeral. So they would blast his organ at a very important part of the sermon just to scare everybody. Again, I have no idea why he wanted to have the pipes blast fire, but I think he was just bored. Speaking of exploding objects, of course fire was a scary notion in the Victorian era, as it was very prevalent and very difficult to reduce. They didn't really have much to prevent these great fires that has affected large populations and portions of towns and cities. Especially if your exploding organ exploded, you might want to have a backup plan. So the exploding organ resulted in the creation of the exploding hand grenade fire extinguisher, as it was born. Originally the thought was, hey, if we can't get to all the areas all at once, why don't we just toss a new hand grenade fire extinguisher, as this fire extinguisher was designed to be thrown like a hand grenade, and it was patented in 1883. However, the glass bottle contained poisonous toxic liquids which could enter the body, damaging the lungs, kidneys, and liver. So you can toss it, but just stay very far away from it. In the end though, this invention turned out to be a flop, and although the concept was nice, it didn't do much. But let's say it did get too hot, and no, the new hand grenade fire extinguisher couldn't do the job, but you know what might be? Your hat. It can be very hot in the summer, and even if you want to look fashionable, it can be tough when your outfit is drenched in sweat. So in order to avail from getting sweaty, try the new air conditioner top hat. This wonderful and underachieved invention is the bona fide ventilated top hat, as it advertised by John Fuller and Company in 1849. The bona fide ventilating hat would have allowed men to wearing hats without overheating, as it has a vent at the top of the hat and basically be able to circulate air into the man's head while he's still wearing said hat. I said hat so many times you can take a shot. I mean, don't do that. I mean, it was also moderate trend like every other trend that we see, but it didn't last as trends die out hard. And I feel like if you were bald, you might want to try this invention out, as it might be better because you don't have hair. But speaking of hair, there might be some who might find the electric hairbrush pretty fascinating, as this fashionable hairbrush is actually powered by magnets despite its advertisements of being an electric hairbrush. Because what's common in the Victorian era is false advertising or clickbaits. When you go to your local salesman or even to an eccentric bloke on the street, he might harass you and your family enjoying the evening to promote his electric hairbrush. After all, brushing one's hair is a tedious task, especially if it's very long. Actually, this was powered by magnets as they were marketed at, but Victorians who feared of going bald really was the main people that they were looking at. But of course that wasn't enough for the superficial markets of the Victorian era, so they had to sprinkle some white lies or some incentives. They also claimed these electric hairbrushes could cure constipation, malaria, lameness, rheumatism, and blood diseases and paralysis. I think the reason why so many inventions led to other medical illnesses is because the Victorian era they had so many and were not always able to fight the root cause of their ailments. But don't worry, after all, things like the electric corset would help you if you're feeling sick. When you think about a corset, you might think it was utilized as a fashion or shapewear type of fabric, but apparently this was also used to help women with a weak back, chills, and of course, rheumatism. Created and patented by a man named Cornelius Bennett Harness, he said that every married man should buy an electric corset for his wife, if he loves her. In the ad it says, in appearance of these corsets do not differ from those usually worn, being made of the same material and parentheses best quality. In the latest style and most approved shapes, they are in fact the best thing for ladies young or old, especially those who have a weak back, chills, or rheumatism, and even hysteria. It also helps with internal complaints, loss of appetite, and nervous dyspepsia, dementia, kidney disorders, and so much more. Man, a corset can do it all? Either way, he got sued because the electric corset was actually magnetic rather than electric. All it had was a magnetized steel busk of the plates at the front that attached together to fasten the corset. The articles and the sellings of this corset ended up being a flop anyway, as it resulted to a lot of customers demanding their money back. Even at one point they got arrested because of the scams, and the jury couldn't make a formal decision about Harness. The courts ordered that the company would be wound up, and almost immediately Harness had to try to resurrect himself as a medical electric institute and was allowed to do so on the condition it was under an actual qualified medic. Didn't end up working out though, as his reputation as a shady man was already out in the open. But hey, if your back was already broken because of the corset, you might as well do some physiotherapy. But it wasn't officially noted at the time of the Victorian era, but it was definitely something that they were on their way into developing. Well, to be honest, in the Victorian era, they had the idea of exercise being good for you, but not so much to the extent of knowing how. So they made this exercise chair. It was basically a swing with springs, and you just sit on it and bounce, kind of like a baby bouncer, but for adults. And so for this reason, the machine was used to just have you force sit and bounce. I mean, I don't know. It just seems lazy. But every person's fitness journey is unique to them, so maybe it'll help jumpstart for you, or sit start, or bounce start. I don't know, man. Well, you know what I mean. But in some good intentions, the invention was also helpful to those who were disabled and helped them get to exercise. Maybe the chair should come back. What do you think? I mean, something that could come back are these Parasol Spectacles or umbrella spectacles. I don't know. It came across the mind of one inventor to combine your parasols with glasses, also known as the lunette parasol. And the reason this was made was so that you could peek out of the umbrella like the chismosa you are. It's interesting though, when you see these inventions, I also think about the modern day Japan, and they also have inventions for random things, like a tiny fan to cool your ramen before you eat it, or a face mask bib to prevent your hair from falling into your ramen. But the Victorians, who didn't really have ramen, were way ahead of their time, as everyone else were inventing things like the mustache guard. Yes, for ladies, you don't need to worry about your mustache, but for the men who drank a lot of tea, coffee, or drank anything in general, their mustaches would get in the way. So the Acme Mustache Guard was born, a solid comfort while eating and drinking, and no need to use napkins. Apparently, it was made out of gold or silver plating, and it can be carried into your pocket and has different sizes respected to the mustache length. And it was at a retail price of $2. Doesn't seem too bad when you think about it, but when you realize it was back in the day, that's apparently $4,500 now. Would you still buy it? Don't do it. But when you can't afford your $4,500 mustache guard, you can end up stealing it and will end up in jail for theft. And of course, criminals in the prison systems weren't able to avoid the wacky invention world of the Victorian era. They might have been forced to do the hand hard labor machine, a hand crank for criminals. The manufacturer boom of the time created this hand crank meant for prisoners sentenced to hard labor. Basically, this crank machine was a device which would turn a crank by hand, which is in turn forced your 4 large cups or ladles through the sand inside a drum, doing nothing useful but just turning. Male prisoners had to turn the handle 6,000 to 14,400 times over the period of a 6-hour day work period. I guess we do have to use our tax dollars towards something. Well, that's all for today. Thank you for joining me. If you were an inventor, what would you make? Be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. My name is Jess, and I wish you all the best. Bye.